Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review How It Ends. This is currently on Netflix right now, so it's a convenient way to say that you can see this film if you do so desire after I'm to go on to talk about it, or if you've already seen this film and you just kind of want to hear my thoughts about it, that's great too. How It Ends. I, I felt for this film that I was like, this is such like an interesting road trip movie because on one side of things you're like, man, this is a very like slow paced movie, but a slow paced film that at some points does have these like action moments or these dangerous moments, or like people are desperate and going on and like waving guns and like stealing gas. And so it's kind of like, okay, wait for the movie to pick up, um wait for characters to be added, wait to see where all these characters are to head in this story. And that eventually just comes like fairly interesting, fairly easily to me, to where when I originally watched this movie, when it originally dropped, like it was so like I was so like fascinated by this movie, by all of a sudden everybody just kind of losing their minds, and everyone was so easy to just try and like intimidate somebody and try to steal from somebody. And every bit of this movie starts to become like you have to kind of second guess every time you get out of your car if you're really helping somebody. And that's what I found so interesting about this film, is like, well, are you really helping somebody, or are you getting taken advantage of? Or like, can you trust that this person is really a like a police officer? Can you trust anybody in this world now? So we come to find out in this movie, and and then I'll get into like spoilers about this, but I'm just kind of teeing it up still. Uh, I felt like this movie, like grading wise, like this is a decent film. This is a, I would have to like grade this as like an okay film. Um, I can't go on and say that this is like a good film, and like I would recommend people seeing it, but realize you're going to get like a road trip movie that is to be like a very like kind of wait for things to kind of pick up, but like there is some good parts of this story. It feels like there is some like payout moments of you having to wait for XYZ things to happen. And I think for people that have technically seen like the first Zombieland, like a lot of people, and this isn't a zombie movie, but I'm saying still, like for those of you that had seen kind of like Zombieland, like you might feel um, that this could be like similar to that in a post-apocalyptic like manner, where most of Zombieland feels like a road trip also. But the way of which that this post-apocalyptic world is to happen is, I guess, after I believe for me, a nuke had dropped upon this, uh, upon some uh, part of the United States, because we have a road trip where two guys are going off into Seattle. So, like, that's the only reason why I would say a bomb was to drop onto the United States somewhere, possibly nearby Seattle. So, really, with that, there seems to be some aftermath of that, some clouds of sorts that are to happen, and so some ash clouds and stuff like that. So, creates for some interesting like visuals and some interesting uh, set pieces and so on and so forth. But yeah, let's go on into, excuse me, into double five time territory. Let's just go into spoilers. Uh, I would recommend someone watching this. I would. Um, it is an interesting enough story to probably recommend. In the end, there probably are some movies similar to this. Like I would probably say the Chris Pine movie, like Carriers, where it seems that movie is to be much more concerned about like people getting sick, but that movie is to mostly be like a road trip kind of film where we have our characters wanting to try to go on to make it to some like hospital, and so like that became like a fairly interesting film. But anyways, let's go on into that double five time territory. Let's just go into what is always to be called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. So, in the very beginning of the film, we have Will and we have Sam. And so Sam is in Seattle, and Will is to trek out to meet with Tom and Paula, because I guess he's kind of doing some business anyways. So, because Will was with Sam when she was to like find out that she was pregnant and that she was to have a baby boy, and so Will wants to go on to meet up with Tom to ask for Sam's hand in marriage to do the right thing. So Sam goes on and meets with Paula and meets with Tom, and Sam, before Will is to go there, Sam is to tell Will, like, whatever you do, don't talk about this boat. So, but Will is just like, well, like, hey, like, whenever I just kind of run out of something to say, I always just bring up the boat. Like, there's nothing else between the two of us besides me just kind of coming up with dead air. So, Will goes, meets with Tom, and so uh, Tom is willing to go on and get drinks ready for Will, but Tom is telling Will like, "Well, hey, how about you go to the kitchen and see if Paula needs help?" Will goes to Paul and say, "Hey, do you need any help with making any of the food?" Paul's like, "Oh no, you're a guest. Like, go on and just kind of just sit next to Tom." So Will and Tom, like, obviously, like, never really good vibes between these two people. It's just it just is what it is. So Tom and Will, like, we go on, and like there's not much for them to really talk about here. And so Tom eventually at some point is to bring up this boat model that Tom's to have, and so it's like, oh my god, he's bringing it up. So we have Tom that is to mention like, oh yeah, like this is a great model, but like, hey, how about you just kind of go on and put that model back for safety. So they go on and they eat dinner, and while they go on and they eat dinner, we have it where Will is to mention that they're possibly thinking about, like, instead of being or living in an apartment, that they're thinking about like wanting to buy a house. And so Tom is just like, well, like, hey, I'm willing to fork over some money for you to put a down payment on a house, but like I need to kind of look into things before I go on and lend you this money. And Will is like, well, you know what? Like, I think that like money is going well with my business that I'm doing, and eventually I'll go into private practice. But hey, I think like I have money. And Tom is just like, well, yeah, but like I don't know, like because uh, Tom has loaned out money to other relatives before, and Will is like, well, yeah, but like we don't really need, but we have, of course, where Tom is talking about how Will and Sam were to go on and just kind of move away from Tom. And Will was to mention to Tom, it's like, well, maybe there's a reason why, like, Sam decided to just move away from you. Maybe she just doesn't want to be around you, like, because maybe you're just hard to freaking deal with. And so all of a sudden, we have kind of Tom who's like, well, hey, like, don't use that kind of language. Don't go on and like say that kind of stuff. Like, this is my place. Like, don't go on. So Paula is to really just tell Will here. It's like, yeah, I think it's time for you to just kind of get out of here. So Will did not go on and tell Tom, like, hey, like, you're gonna be a new granddad. He never got to any of that. And so Will goes on and he makes it to his hotel or whatever he's staying at, and he gets up the next day is to get a phone call from Sam, and Sam is talking to Will, and Sam's like, well, I'm not your wake up call, am I? And Will's like, oh, I was just kind of like, I was just sleeping here. Like, what time is it? And Sam's like, well, it's so and so, like Seattle time. And Will's like, oh crap, I need to get going. So Will starts heading to the airport to just get out of there. It's like, man, just probably a waste, right? So Will goes to the airport. All of a sudden, he sees every single plane is all delayed, and they lose power in the airport. And so it seems before they lose power, there was this like eyewitness news person who was doing late breaking news as it was happening. So Will realizes that like he can't call Sam. He's leaving her like voicemails, like they're because he can't reach her. So Will, considering he has no one else here but Tom and Paula, Will is to make it back to Tom and Paula because it's like, hey, like these people are going to be my family whether I like them or not. So I'm going to go back to them to like just ask them if they know anything, or to really just try and get back to them to just kind of see like what they're going to do, like what their plan is. So Will makes it back, and so like Tom is immediately like packing up and like making all these plans, and so Will's like, well, hey Tom, what's your plan? So Tom is to mention that Paula is to go to the Stevens family because I guess they're like survivalists, and like they plan for all this kind of stuff, so like Paula will be good there. But Tom wants to go on and is asking Will if he wants to go along to go and see Sam because she's by herself in Seattle. So Tom is immediately turning to Will, like, do you want to go? And Will's like, well, of course. So they both go together into this car. Tom is to hug Paula goodbye, as she, of course, to kind of make her own route. So Tom and Will go off into this road trip, and they start driving. And so they start driving, and they are to make it to this gas station. And there seems to be some unsavory characters there. And we go on, we have one woman who's like, hey, can I get into the, can I see your back seat, guy? And Will's like, no, like, I'm not interested. And so, like, we have these two kind of hillbilly-looking characters that kind of walk up, and they're like, hey, like, and the girl's like, hey, did you hear what he said to me? And then all of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, what? Like, so all of a sudden we go on and we have Tom, who is to open the back of his car and is to whip out this gun, and the people start to like run off. And so when Tom and Will get back in the car, Will's like, "You should have told me that you had a gun." And Tom is like, "Well, hey, like, I wanted us, no matter what, to keep this car, because if we don't have this car, like, this is all for nothing. It's game over." So Will and Tom go on after getting gas, and all of a sudden they end up getting like seemingly pulled over by what they think is a cop car. And so Will is to get out of the car because he's like, well, like, let me see like what this officer is gonna like possibly have us do. So Will goes out to the car to meet this police officer who they believe is a police officer. Instead, it's just some guy in a cop car that is to have this shotgun. And so all of a sudden, Tom is telling Will, get back in the car. So Will is to scramble back into the passenger seat. And so Tom is driving like crazy. He's like, we got to get out of here. So Tom is to accidentally like crash this car, and Tom breaks a couple ribs in the process. So all of a sudden, this guy who is in this cop car is just kind of waiting and is to go on and find this car again, and he is to try to have Will like, come on, get out of the car. So Tom like surprises this guy because I guess we find out that Tom is to be this former Marine. So Tom comes from behind and smacks this guy with a rock, and is to like either smack him unconscious or basically just beat him to death with a rock. So they decide it's like, well, okay, we're gonna just take all of his, we're gonna take all of his, we're gonna take all of his stuff. So Tom and Will are to take this cop car and are to drag the Cadillac that they were driving in with this police car to a place that they can hope could possibly fix either one of these cars. So luckily they can fix the like we have a girl named Ricky who can fix this car, but there's a possibility that maybe the radiator might might break down, or might like need like coolant into it or something like that. And so like they just have to be kind of concerned, they have to kind of baby this car. So we had Tom that was to also like tape the rear end of this caddy. It seems that Tom and Will are to offer Ricky a ride for her to get out of here. The more and more that Tom is to talk to Ricky, the higher this price goes. It's like, well, hey, like, I'll give you like 400 now and 400 later. And Ricky's like, you need to give me that 400 later now, because I'm not trusting for you to give me any money later on. Like with the way things are turning out here, no, it makes no sense. So the higher and higher that they talk here is like Tom and Will are offering Ricky a road trip, and then they'll give her 2,000 after all this is said and done, for her to kind of watch over this car and to make sure that it's going to last them this trip. And Ricky's like, well, both of you are kind of shady characters. I don't know if I want to go on and like go with you. And Tom is convincing Ricky, it's like, well, hey, like, you know what? There may be some dangerous things out in this world right now, but Tom and Will, both of us, like, are not one of them. Like, we are not gonna go. We're gonna like go on and just kind of make sure that we can just make it to this place to find Sam, and like we don't want anything else. Like, we don't want to do anything else. So Ricky's kind of heard enough, and she is just convinced. Is like, okay, like I'll just go with you guys and we'll see what happens. So Tom, Will, and Ricky are now on this road trip, and so they all make their way off. So Tom, Will, and Ricky are driving, and so they have it consistently where Tom is to have his broken ribs, and eventually they come into play here. So, because Tom, Will, and Ricky go drive, and we have Ricky who's asking him like, "Hey, what's your favorite music?" And Will and Tom are like, "Yeah, I don't think that this is this kind of road trip." So, uh, so we go along, and this leads us to a number of scenarios here. We have them making it to some diner, which is to be kind of like the Channel Zero environment where Ricky is to go on and jump into this pool, and all of a sudden she realizes that the pool is way too hot and she thought it would be cold. So Tom and Will are to go inside this diner hoping that they can possibly find some food or some like something that they can use. Ricky just finds this vending machine that she pulls out all these items like, okay, like this will be the thing that we'll use for food. So, and I might be saying this stuff kind of out of order, but I'm going to try to do the best I can to go on into all of this stuff. So, they drive further and further along, and at some point they have like cell phone service, and come to find out, on Tom's phone, Sam was to leave this message that was kind of broken up. You couldn't really hear it. So uh, Sam doesn't say like where she's going. It just kind of says like, uh, "Dad, I love you," and like tell Will. Like it says nothing after that. So Tom and Will, like there's nothing they can do about this scenario. It's not like she like left a message saying like, "Hey, I'm gonna be here now," so on and so forth. So we have these guys going further and further into these kind of darker roads, and some shadier things are happening. So we go on, and these three characters are to be in this kind of very kind of ashy part of uh, these roads, and all of a sudden we have this one woman who is to mention that her tire is flat, and so they go out and like, okay, we'll help this woman. Tire is flat. Okay, that seems reasonable enough. All of a sudden this leads to a number of men that have all these guns, and they're like, well, hey, we want your gas. I don't know why every single person has to have a hillbilly like or southern accent, but that's what happens when you do a movie that so how many different voices could you have? Excuse me, sir, I would love your gas. So these guys, of course, are just after these guys' gas, and basically are wanting to take every bit of their gas. And Willa's like, no, like just leave us one canister, and they take everything. So we have Will, and we have Tom, and we have Ricky, and Will is telling this woman, it's like, hey, you're gonna leave? And this woman is like, no, like I have my husband here. And so they're like, well, off, like we're like, you helped them. So they go on, they drive off, and they're chasing after these people that were putting a gun to them. So now Ricky is forced to shoot up this car, and she ends up popping one of the tires, and then the car ends up flipping. So Ricky ends up grabbing the gas just in time because Will is saying like, "Hey, you gotta just kind of quickly get this gasoline. Maybe I'll help these guys out of this car." Come to find out, there wasn't enough time. They just had to scramble, get the gas, and get the heck out of there because the car exploded. So those guys sadly died. And I think there was also another moment where there was this car accident happening between these two cars, and they go on and they check to see if everybody is like someone they can help, but come to find out everybody is like really near dead. And Ricky was to go and hide out because they find some other car that has come their way here, and Tom and Will didn't know if they can trust these people, so they make it back into their car. And Tom was willing to like drive off and risk Ricky not being there. So Ricky makes it back into the car, and Will wanted to like stay there so Ricky can make it back into the car. So Tom, of course, is with Ricky, telling her it's like, well, hey, like, does our agreement still stand? If our agreement still doesn't stand, like, we can drop you off right now. And Ricky doesn't say anything, so the agreement still stands. And because Ricky just felt it was awful that Tom was to just leave all those bodies there. And Tom and his brain is thinking, like, well, hey, a lot of these people are near dead. The nearest possible hospital is like hours away. Like, these people are going to die. So after all of that just going on, where just a ton of people are all to be dead or dying or going to hold a gun to everybody, Ricky, after this moment, after going on and chasing down these guys and having to shoot up someone's car, having it flip and explode, at that point, Ricky is now done. She is done with both Tom and Will. She has decided to get out of this car, and she grabs all her stuff and she leaves. Will is convincing her, like, Ricky, like, stay with us, you'll be safe. And Ricky's like, I have done well enough for a long time. Like, I don't need you people. And Ricky is almost tempted to probably go back to her reservation, or her reserve. Let me pause here for a second. All right. So at this moment, we have Ricky who has just had enough, and Tom and Will are just thinking that, like, well, hey, like, we'll just rest here. We'll just take the day. And so Tom and Will are to go on and sleep, and Ricky, of course, is to be gone. Absolutely gone. Will is to kind of go out and try to see if he can see her anywhere, but he is to realize, like, yeah, she completely left. We had also a moment when when they were at that place where Ricky was getting all this vending machine food, Tom was to try to lift up these gas containers, and he ends up hurting his ribs even more. And so it seems that every time that Tom is to try to go on and lift anything, he ends up just hurting his ribs even more so, realizing that it may be time that Tom at some point may die here, sadly. So Tom and Will are to go on further into this journey between the both of them, and we find out that Tom at some point is to need this pen to be injected into his lungs, into his lung, because one of his lungs is collapsing, and so Will is to help Tom out with that, but we're really starting to see that maybe Will might die soon. So Will and Tom are having this exchange where Will is to come clean about certain things, mentioning that uh, because of course Tom is to talk about his dad and how like Will like didn't have much of a dad, uh, because it seemed that Will was to have a dad that went on to just some other family, and Will is to see him like every couple of years. So Tom is to go on and talk about his dad and how his dad used to give him some look that it's like, man, like, how is it that I brought you into the world kind of look, where Tom was to say that his dad was a, a piece of work, or a real like bad guy. So Will eventually is to tell Tom that uh, that Sam is to be pregnant, and Tom is like, I know. And Will's like, really? Sam was to go on after that whole dinner situation. Sam was to tell Paula everything about her being pregnant and everything like that. So that it was a baby boy, and like Sam just spilled everything. And so Tom is like completely okay with everything, and like that was the main reason why Tom went on this road trip after everything. So Will is to go on and say that he promises that he will always protect Sam, and so on and so like Will is to also like mention that the whole boat situation, that I guess Tom, besides having a model boat, had a real boat, and Will was to take the blame for crashing Tom's real boat, but it was actually Sam who crashed it and the boat sank. So Tom was like, wait a minute. So, like, Sam broke the boat, and Will's like, well, yeah, she was really drunk that night, and she used, like, your boat, and it sunk, and so I just took the blame because it was the right thing to do. And so Tom was like, oh, okay, all right. So let me pause here again for a second. All right, sorry. So we go on into this story, and we have Will at some points going on and knowing certain people as he's to go on through uh, like these roads. We have Will who is to go on and make it to a certain part of town where he's to talk to the sheriff, and Will is to say like, well, hey, I know a couple people in town, and I believe they're the Dumonts, and the wife of the one that I know owns this like pottery spot, and like I don't know the name of it, and so the sheriff is like, okay, like we'll just kind of let him through, even though they're like, well, like everybody just kind of says that they know somebody from a part of this town, and Will's like, well, hey, like we just wanted to go to this place for a couple hours, and so both Tom and Will end up meeting a girl named Meg, and Meg is mentioning about like how she feels that some guy that she was to be with, that he's probably dead, that he's probably gone. And Will's like, well, no, like I think he's probably fine. You're just thinking that he's dead. So like maybe you should just kind of get that out of your head that maybe he's completely fine. So Will is to go in and shower and just kind of take some resources from this woman, like water and stuff like that, just kind of getting jugs of water and then leaving. Then we also go on and have Will, who uh, is to go on and eventually be having Will and Tom together going to this bridge, trying to make it to Seattle because, of course, Tom is in really bad health. So they want to check Tom out in this hospital. But while they're going to do that, all of a sudden we have a bridge where there's a bunch of guys that are just wanting to take control of both Tom and Will. And like they have a bunch of motorcycles, they have a bunch of like equipment, and so like I guess they're gonna want to try to steal things away from these two men. So now we get this scene where Will is having to kind of like spin around in this bridge and going and have to take down some of these motorcycle guys, shoot some of these men, and then miraculously they are able to go on and have like Tom shoot a couple of these guys down. And so after they both make it through this bridge, Will is telling Tom, it's like, hey, we made it. And Tom dies because he's been like kind of lifting this gun, and like he just dies right then and there. So Will decides to go further on until he can no longer go on, and that leads him to decide to just take the rest of his supplies after he was to go on and find this huge train that derailed that had all this military stuff on it and all these like tanks and like armored cars and all this stuff. And Will is to take the gas from there, and that's when we had the moment where Tom was to go on and eat that needle in his chest from when he was still alive. So we have Will that after Tom is dead, we just have Will who douses this car with gasoline, throws a road torch on there, a road flare, just tosses it in there and burns the car. And then Will just, whatever he has on him in this backpack is what he just goes on and just grabs and just takes with him. So Will is making it further and further into trying to get to Seattle. And so we have, of course, Will that is kind of thumbing it, hoping that someone will stop, and come to find out, it seems like there's a family that is driving along that does decide to go on, like, okay, let's go on and let's help this guy. So the Wagoneer family, like I guess is what you can call them, because we have the Wagoneer man, the Wagoneer woman, and the Wagoneer girl. So they don't have any actual names here. So man, was that great to just waste the time trying to find that out. So we go on, and Will is to decide that he's going to ride with his family, but the Wagoneer man wants Will's gun, and so he's like, okay, take it. So these guys are going north, and he's going to Seattle, so he's technically heading west. So they're like, well, hey, we'll just take you as well as we can take you. And Will is to take these people to his father's house. And he's to ask if his father's around. It seems like no one's around. So Will is to tell this guy, like, well, hey, like, here's some beds. But I'm also going to tell you in this place there's like 3 weeks worth of food, and the trade-off of this house and this food is your car, because I'm going to need a four-wheel drive to get to where I'm going. And the guy's like, well, I'll take it. So Will goes on, takes his car, and is to make it further and further into Seattle, where it seems there is to be this like ash, kind of snow all around this environment. So it seems that the air is to get more and more like toxic, or to be more like unbreathable the further and further that Will goes. So conveniently, Will is to find this fire truck, and it has this gas mask like how we see here. So Will is to be forced, because like he doesn't want to take too much gas into this car, and so Will at some point is just to go on by foot to make it to Sam's place. So Sam is to go on and make it to Sam's place, to find that she of course is not there, but it seems that at the door there is a sign that says like, Will, like, find me at this address. So Will's like, okay, so like, good, at least I know where she is technically. So Will takes the car and goes to this address to find that Sam and some guy named Jermaine, or Jeremiah, my bad. So Will is to find that Sam's still alive, and they're hugging and they're embracing, and so Will is to tell Sam her story about like Will wouldn't have ever made it here to be with Sam if it weren't for Tom. So like, honestly, if I was writing this, I would say that if they're gonna name a kid, they're gonna name a boy, name it Tom, because that seems to be fitting considering Tom died to save Will. Wouldn't that have been nice? So Will is to say to Sam, it's like, well, hey, like for now on, like I'm never letting you out of my sight. Like we're gonna be like together. Like we're gonna be together forever, no matter what happens. So it seems that immediately, since it's both Sam and both Jeremiah here, it seems that Jeremiah is already wanting to like put a wrench between this couple. It seems. So Sam is to wake up in the middle of the night, and Sam and Jeremiah are kind of at this fire, just kind of talking about things. Will is to get out of bed and is to meet them. So all of a sudden, Jeremiah is talking about his theory, because he's a game developer, he's some software engineer, and so Jeremiah is thinking that this is some simulation, it's some ruse, it's some fake like thing, like having it be that like some nuke was to drop in this certain area, and that it's all just a sham. And Will's like, no, like Will has seen too many things that is to convince him otherwise. And Will is to say, it's like, well, hey, I have no clue what happened, and neither do you. Like, don't pretend that you even know, like, what all happened here. So we have Will and we have Jeremiah on just opposite ends of things. And so Will and Sam are to enjoy their another night together. So Will is to go on in the early part of the morning and see Jeremiah just kind of shiftingly like looking through certain vehicles and certain things. And so Will is going on and meeting up with Jeremiah, and Will's like, hey Jeremiah, what are you doing? So Jeremiah's like, well, hey, yeah, like I was just looking through your car because it seems like there was two kids that were going off, and like I was kind of worried that somebody might be stealing your stuff. And Will's like, sure, sure they are. How about you take me to these two kids? And so Jeremiah is to go on and just be very apologetic about like the stupid things that he said last night. He's like, "Hey, I just kind of want to be in control of the situation," and yada yada yada. So Jeremiah also was to see Will's gun, and it is to see how many bullets that like Will's gun really has. It's only really one bullet left. So Jeremiah and Will are going into this forest, and the further and further they go, Will is to tell Jeremiah, it's like, well, I don't think there's any kids out here, is there? And Jeremiah is like, well, like, here's the thing. And so both of them whip out their guns. Will is to kill Jeremiah, and Will is just to grab Jeremiah's gun. And all of a sudden, there seems to be some event that is to lead both Will and Sam to just get out of here. And so while Will and Sam are just driving crazily out of here, we of course have this big, massive cloud that is following them. And so Sam is telling Will, it's like, oh man, like it's like so like nearby us, like we need to like get out of here. So of course, Will and Sam are saying their "I love yous" and they're saying like whatever happens, like we're gonna get out of here. So really, that's just how the movie just ends with that kind of cliffhanger like moment. And I'm like, man, like everything was good up until Sam finally found, or up until Will finally found Sam, and then the movie just kind of went on to just like I guess they really didn't know where to go after that moment. Because it's just like, well, how do we finish this movie? Since now Will found Sam, there has to be now a way for us to kind of get some other moments here to just like end this movie with like a cliffhanger like moment. So it kind of sucked that there wasn't like this definitive ending, or we just have to assume that maybe Sam and Will died, and like maybe we can just go on and say that like possibly like this is gonna be a movie where not a lot of people live at the end of all this. So I think that's it. This video is probably more than long enough for this kind of movie. So with that said, I think I'm just gonna get out of here. At the end of the day, I could say that this was just a decent film. Like it wasn't something that like I would recommend this film. Like I would like I've seen it more than once now. like so. Anyways, I think I'm just gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody.